We got some good news. The Washington Post is laying off about 300 journalists. The news broke earlier this week, and I got to say, I'm excited. It's another sign that the media, the legacy media establishment, the infrastructure that has been at work at mostly lying to us for who knows about a century continues to fall. It continues to crumble. Now, that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay now, that all the information that we're going to get is going to be true and whatnot. In fact, it's just they're going to adjust. But I want to get into this Washington Post news. I wrote an article about it, so it's fresh on my mind. So I want to do that before I forget what exactly I'm talking about here. So on Wednesday, news broke that 30% of Washington Post journalists are getting laid off. And so the executive editor of the Post, Matt Murray, he said some interesting things. He said that the company had lost too much money for too long and it hadn't been meeting readers' needs. And he said something that I find kind of works with that as well. And he said, even as we produce much excellent work, we too often write from one perspective for one slice of the audience. So that's clearly a dig at the fact that the people who make up the Washington Post are left-wing fanatics. The Washington Post, of course, is a left-wing newspaper. Apparently, they lost like tens of thousands of subscribers last year or in 2024 when the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, Mr. Amazon, told them to not endorse a presidential candidate for 2025. And there was a big uproar. The opinion section editor quit over it. Like they were so outraged. But the interesting thing is that they always endorse the Democrat. So I don't know what kind of legitimacy it has when it's kind of a given. They're going to endorse the Democrat. Like that's what the Washington Post does. So there isn't, I don't know what all the fuss was about. I think it's just ideologue. They think that they carry more weight than they do. And that's kind of the thing about a lot of these people who work in legacy media. There's obviously an air of elitism, of supremacy of some sort and whatnot. And I've been working in media for a long time, never in legacy media or anything like that. And I'm not going to pretend that, working a small town newspaper is the same thing. But, I work for a national, I write for a national magazine now, and I've been doing it for years. And, I'm not going to lie either and say that we have New York Times or even Washington Post readership. But I like to think that we make an impact. And I like to think that the New American is going to continue growing as the news landscape, the media landscape continues to change. And so it's changing. It has been changing for a long, long time. When I was in newspapering, it was in the phase where basically if you weren't posting stuff on social media, which was essentially Twitter and Facebook, then no one was going to read your stories. I spoke to, when I was starting my little outlet, I was speaking to other folks around the state who started theirs. And basically one guy ended up shuttering it because Facebook had changed their algorithm, and that basically stifled his readership. So by the time I got in the game, it was already at that phase. But the whole thing, the landscape started to change with the internet in the early 2000s to mid 2000s. Craigslist and similar classified style websites were cutting into advertising revenue for the newspapers. And so then it began, and over, and more hits came to the newspaper industry until it became the skeleton that it is today. Now there's lots of what they call news deserts and whatnot. There's local reporting is in a pretty bad spot. And you know what? I kind of feel bad about that, because local reporting, a lot of people conflate local newspapers with, I don't know, Washington Post and the New York Times, and they're not they're not the same. They just aren't. A lot of the people, most of the people in uh, small local newspapers, even though most of them I still think are liberal. I mean, everyone I worked with was left wing. I was the only one that wasn't, but there's others who aren't, whatnot. But they're more rational, they're more sensible, and they stick to things that are important. For instance, we have a little newspaper here in the town where I work. I mean, in the town where I live. I live outside in the county, but the paper broke the story that that there's a data center that's coming here, and they got a lot of attention, and they jumped on it, and they gave us some information here and there, and it's like that's that's kind of the thing that newspapers I think are good at, and I'm hoping that there will be a resurgence, and I'm hoping that there's going to be a partition of understanding amongst the people when it comes to looking at national newspapers different from local newspapers. But anyway, I want to get back to back to this idea of where we are in the landscape, in the information landscape, because while small town newspapers are great, and hopefully we can get a resurgence of them and whatnot, the world and Western society is largely shaped by information from the larger platforms. They control the flow of information. I mean, that's how it's been for the most part. But social media and podcasting and all that, it's changed the landscape significantly. It has totally changed the landscape. You know, you had influencers pop up and start reporting like directly onto social media, cutting clips and whatnot. You have the case of Nick Shirley, who went up to Minnesota and basically blew open the whole Somali fraud scandal that we're still learning about, and that is very much in the process right now. Like, we're not even close to understanding everything that's going on there, but it appears that for the time being, we wouldn't be there if Nick Shirley, uh, some a 23-year-old with a camera and a YouTube channel, didn't go start poking around. So that's great. I know that the elitists would like to say, well, it's not vetted, it's not credible, whatever. It's like, obviously it's credible, because then the legacy media jumped on and they realized, and there's more reporting coming, that first of all, the local news outlets were reporting that they were failing audits, that the daycares had all sorts of violations and whatnot. So it's the guy did a good job. The guy did a good job. And I'm sorry to, for all my friends in journalism, whatever, it's like, you don't need a journalism degree to be a journalist. Okay. I hopped into a newsroom without a journalism degree. Everyone there had a journalism degree. And before my first year ever in journalism was over, I had won a first place national award for investigative reporting. Okay. That's, that's as high as you can get in that newsroom, in that class, and I did it before a year's over. That's not to say that I'm super special or whatever, but all I'm saying is you can learn on the job. You have to be inquisitive. You have to work hard. You have to be okay with being stubborn and asking questions and whatnot. It's really a, there's a certain personality that's fit to do it, and I think that's really what it takes. It's an inquisitive personality, kind of like a combative personality, I would say, and I certainly have that. I think that has served me well when it comes to reporting and things like that. I'm not easily swayed by what readers or even the pressure. You have to be able um, to do well under pressure, because you're going to have people from all sides, and you have to be okay with dealing with that and just kind of let it slide off your back. But so here we are, we're in this different environment, and legacy media continues to fall apart, and that's great. Certainly great. Can't argue. Can't argue with that. But like, where is this going? This doesn't mean we're necessarily out of the woods, and I think it's important that people realize that we are not out of the woods. Well, so with COVID and those years between, regarding the elections and COVID and various other things, there was that weird phase, that really censorious phase, where now we have learned agents from various government agencies, including the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, had embedded themselves in these social media platforms. and they basically dictated the suppression and the censorship that a lot of us experience. I was certainly one of them. Our magazine was one of them. Social media sent us notifications saying that basically we've restricted your reach, and it was significant. We went from millions, reaching millions a month, to like 60,000. I remember that because I was actually running the social media department, or partially running it at the time. And that was because social media, this democratization of information, was already in full throttle. Like, that was already happening. So the government got ahead on that. They jumped in and they basically started controlling the social media companies. We ended up learning that there were lawsuits. Alex Berenson and RFK Jr. and others, or at least Children's Health Defense and others, jumped in there. They filed lawsuits, and as more information, the Twitter files then came out. Elon Musk bought Twitter, it became X, but he started letting journalists like Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi dive in, and we learned it's like, oh, there's federal agents, and they're dictating to private companies, Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, on how to operate. Isn't that weird? That's kind of like the epitome, the classic definition of fascism, right? So fascism, ironically, was brought about by the Democrats, the left wing, which the leftists always said it would come back from the right, which they're not necessarily wrong either, because we're seeing some of that now. But the misunderstanding is that everyone, or a large part of the people, still think that the two parties are really two parties. They're not. I'm. They're really not. That's why we're seeing it from both sides, because it is indeed a uniparty. But anyway, so here we are. Here we are. The legacy media is falling. This trust in media is at an all-time low. I believe that, what did I cite? Was a Gallup from October 2025, from last year, said that trust is at its lowest level. Trust in major media is at its lowest level, with 28%. And so we're in a good place. But what are they going to do now? What are they doing? Well, they're doing what they already started doing. They're going to flood the zone. They're going to flood the zone, and they are, with lots of noise, lots of disinformation, misinformation. The point being to create confusion. So the truth will be out there. The truth is out there. But what they're going to do their best, until they can censor the internet again, like they're already doing in Europe, like they try to do here before with various laws, until they can get that, what they're going to do is just create a lot of noise, and to make it very difficult for people to know what to believe. They're also going to pit people against each other. They're going to flood the zone with bots, and they're going to buy off influencers and whatnot, and pay them to have certain views and whatnot. All of that is happening. All of that is happening. So basically, the battle over information hasn't necessarily, it's certainly not over, not even close to over. And it'll probably never be over. What has happened, though, is it has changed. It's kind of closing on one front, that being, of course, like I said, the legacy media front, but it is opening up, and has opened up on the other front. So it looks different now. But I think it's still a better place than it was, because before you had these gatekeepers, and it was really hard to get your information out. Well, now you have just a ton of stuff. It's like the Wild West of information. And I really do believe that's better than having everything curated and approved by the machine. So now our task, our burden, is to essentially figure out what is true and what's not. And maybe I'm overly confident in this or whatever, but maybe sometimes we don't even need to necessarily know. I think if you operate by various principles, then you could say, I agree with that. I agree with that policy. I think we should do that. And I would recommend that approach, because I think that would serve us well. For instance, when it comes to politics, you'll have politics is, as Eric Weinstein called it, kayfabe. I believe it's kayfabe. It's professional wrestling. it's a performance. You have a lot of the same people coming and going. They pretend to be, whether conservatives or liberals or whatever. But what they're doing is it's part of a script. It's behind what when no one's looking or whatever over the. What it's really about is power. It's about the lobbyists, the special interests, who pay these people's campaigns. That's what's pushing them. That's what's directing them. It's not the constituents necessarily. But at the same time, there's a legitimacy. There's an element of legitimacy. Like in professional wrestling, it's like, yeah, those guys really were in shape. They really worked on their acrobatics and their moves and stuff like that, and lifting weights and whatnot. But again, the majority of it's entertainment. It's a performance. They're not you. They're putting a show for you. They're telling you what you want to hear. They're playing the audience, but behind the scenes, in the fitting room, whatever, it's the donors, it's the special interests, it's the intelligence agencies. That's who's controlling that whole thing. And so the way we should approach this when it comes to policy is we have to have some principles by which to operate. I consider myself a constitutionalist. I've been privileged to work with an organization that has always been that believes that the solution is the Constitution. That being, of course, the John Birch Society. And the John Birch Society got a lot of shit for a long time, and undeservingly so, because you look around and it's like they were right, we were right. Okay, so I believe as I believe that if we were to get back to the Constitution, as cliche as it sounds, maybe even as hokey as it sounds, that would make America freer and more prosperous. Okay, so for instance, when you look at all these wars, all this intervention, well, the reason for all of that is because it is part of the attempt to build a global apparatus, a global government apparatus. And the US military has kind of served as the muscle on that element. And so they're over there, they're reshaping various regions, they're overthrowing certain people, whatever, all to match, to fall in line with this. So I think I subscribe to the founding fathers philosophy that basically we should try to get along with everyone and kind of mind our own business. I do subscribe to some element of the Monroe Doctrine, but I don't think anything happening in the Middle East, in Asia, is even close to within the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, we have no business being in the Middle East. I understand that there's oil, whatever, but we have lots of oil here, and we can work out unilateral agreements with some of the countries there, as we already have. We have allies there, the Saudis, the Qatar, whatever. You can continue that, but we don't need to have. We have more bases than any other country in the world. Okay, this is not even close. This idea that it's okay for us to be spread out everywhere is absurd, and it is even more absurd when you consider that we are $38 trillion in debt. Isn't it crazy? That you drop I don't know, one of those bunker busting bombs, I don't know what it was, like a couple million or whatever. That is, how can you possibly justify that when you have $38 trillion in debt, when you have a population that is barely scraping by? This is craziness. This is madness. And the fact that we continue to allow this is a testament to how weak and ignorant a lot of people have become. There's no reason for that. No one's going to come attack the United States. That's a propaganda line, because they know what would happen. And this is what George Washington was saying in his farewell address as well, to some degree. And others have said it too. I think it was Lincoln who said, no one's going to come here and take a drink from the Ohio or whatever. Well, the only way that this United States is going to fall is from within. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing a collapse from within. So again, when it comes to policy, there's going to be lots of noise, whatever. But if we have these principles, if we're married to a certain principle of non-intervention, we don't necessarily have to know what the intention of every legislator, of every bill is. All we have to know is what would be best for America. Oh, I know. Let's get out of there. Let's stop spending money there. Let's stop foolishly putting American troops in harm's way on these bases and then say that we need to bomb Iran because they killed soldiers in 1980s and 1990s. Well, that's because we were stupid enough to put them there. We shouldn't have put them there. We should not be putting people in harm's way. So that is the way that we should think. When it comes to fiscal policy. Oh, there's another way. I think a moral policy is to not be in debt, to not spend money that we don't have. And a constitutional policy would require that we basically shutter like almost 80% of the government. We found out about this daycare, as I mentioned, the daycare fraud scandal there. Well, that wouldn't be happening if we were following the Constitution, because there is no permission in the U.S. Constitution or in the Bill of Rights for for federally funded daycare centers. The government does not have permission to take care of your children. It's just not in there. It's not how the founding fathers thought. It's not how they wrote out the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. It's craziness that we've gotten there. You tell that to people, they look at you like all cross-eyed. It's like, what are you talking about? We wouldn't have this problem if we are not doing this. All this fraud that we're being pillaged by is because we have an unconstitutional approach to governing. So I'm going to leave it at that. The idea here, as the information landscape evolves, as it changes, as our lawmakers continue lying to us, as we'll continue receiving propaganda, and it's going to be hard to tell what's true, what's not, who's telling the truth, who's real, who's not. Let's focus on the principles. Let's not get caught up necessarily on the way that it's being delivered or who's telling us, and let's use the principles and the values that are being touted to us to judge what's right and what's wrong, instead of who it's coming from, what outlet is writing it, what influencer is saying. So I'll leave it with that. Thanks a lot. See you guys later.